good afternoon, everyone. That's a good start. Get the first word wrong. Hey, I didn't expect this to be quite so busy, so now I'm a bit thrown. Right, I'm Trisha Gee. I'm a developer advocate for JetBrains. I work mostly with IntelliJ IDEA and Upsource, which is our code review tool. Who's an IntelliJ IDEA user? Everyone. Who isn't an IntelliJ IDEA user? Okay. There was some people who are both. That's fine. This is unusually for a lot of the talks I do. I am going to specifically highlight some IntelliJ IDEA features for Java 9. That's because I have actually been asked to. This is not like me doing a marketing pitch. As many of you probably know, I usually just like to use IntelliJ to do stuff. So this is a tiny bit more IntelliJ specific than normal. So I won't feel offended if Eclipse users want to leave. That's fine. This is also a bit more informal than... Who came to my earlier talk? A bunch of you. This is a bit less prepared than that talk because both Java 9 and the tooling support in IDEA moves along a lot faster. So this is more kind of like just throwing some ideas out there and seeing how it works together rather than it being a fully prepped demo of how things fit together. That's my caveat. And also, last time I ran this at Java 1, it took about 35 minutes. So you might be able to get out early, or you might have loads of time to ask questions about Java 9 or about support in IntelliJ IDEA. Okay, enough preamble. If you've seen any Oracle talks about new features in Java, they always say, oh, don't hold us to it, it might not happen. So this is our safe harbor talk slide saying, anything I promise about what's going to happen in IntelliJ IDEA may or may not happen. It depends a bit on how hard it is and so on and so forth. So if I say it's going to be supported in IntelliJ IDEA in the future, don't turn around and say, Trish promised it, therefore you have to do it. Honest. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to go through... this talk is going to go through some features of Java 9, which I expect a bunch of you were hoping for, and then a bit more about how IntelliJ IDEA is going to work with Java 9. So let's start with the Java 9 stuff. Of course, Java 9 is all about Jigsaw, right? We all know that. That's why it's going to be late again. Sorry, Mark, for bringing that up. And Jigsaw is brilliant because it's going to bring modularization to our code. But the problem with things like Jigsaw is that along the way, as the code base has separated, like certain things become deprecated or not accessible, and people are worried that not only will their code break, but also the libraries that they use might break, and things like the IDEs might break if they start using Java 9. And I don't really care about Jigsaw anyway, so I might just not bother and just wait until value types turn up. Not that I've heard that argument ever. But Java 9, it turns out, when you do a bit of research, is loads more than just Jigsaw. I think the thing is that because there isn't like... With Java 8, obviously there was lambdas and streams and other stuff, which we never looked at the other stuff because we were so excited about lambdas and streams. With Java 9, we get carried away by thinking about Jigsaw, but all of the other stuff is actually quite nice little features that I think are going to impact our lives as developers, just to make our lives a little bit easier. But there's so much of it, and there's so much kind of scattered around. There's not one theme to kind of umbrella over the whole thing. So we don't get to talk so easily about the cool stuff that's going to be in Java 9 that's going to make our lives easier. So let's go straight ahead and try and debunk the first thing of Java 9 might break everything. We're going to start by trying to compile a project in Java 9. So the project that I'm working with is actually a real project that I use when I'm demoing Java 8 features. So this obviously compiles on Java 8. It's fine. Let's switch to using the Java 9 EA. I'm going to compile with the Java 9 EA, but stick with the Java 8 language level, which you probably can't read because on the surface I can't change those font sizes. And when I build, I'm going to see if everything breaks or not. I actually want everything to break, so if it breaks, that's fine. What I would like it to do is to finish building. That would be awesome. Chat amongst your friends. It's fine. Okay, so there's a few things which are going to break straight away. Things like there are some classes, like ones in sun.misc, that you shouldn't have been using in the first place, although like no one really told us. You shouldn't be using in the first place, and there are new ways of doing this stuff. So I'm going to be removing this. And this particular case, which is base 64 encoder, instead what I want to be doing is base 64 java.util.base64 .get encoder .encode to string. Now my code is going to compile, okay, in that particular example. So there are some things that you're probably going to have to change as code has shifted and moved around. And you'll find that there are replacements for a lot of these things. So it's not like, oh, I'm not going to move to Java 9 because everything's going to break. Another thing that you'll find is underscore. Use of underscore as an identifier might not be supported in releases after Java 8. It turns out, though most people didn't really know, underscore is a valid identifier on its own. Like, obviously, you can say underscore something, but it turns out some people were using it as an identifier. And now that people know that, which has been taken away in Java 9, so people are starting to say, oh, that's quite cool, though. I might actually want to use underscore as an identifier. Don't do that. It's a silly idea. Let's call it something more sensible. OK, so there are going to be some little changes like that. So if you compile it against Java 9, you will see, potentially, even in a small code base like this, some things will crop up that you need to make some changes. But then when we do that and we do a build, recompile our project, we should see everything starts to compile. Note, by the way, that IntelliJ IDEA is working perfectly happy with Java 9. Nothing breaks. It's totally fine. You can use Java 9 as the IDE, as the JVM. OK, cool. So we just have some deprecation warnings, but overall, everything still compiles. And that's great. And what I was going to do is take a more serious, chunky open source project and compile it to Java 9. But I thought, A, that's going to be really boring for you to watch, and B, that's definitely going to go wrong. So I'm not going to do that. OK, so we can compile with Java 9. Many of your projects will probably have some small things to work out. But there are migration paths for those things, and they are well documented. So for this build, I'm using build 143, which came out really, really recently. So I definitely implore you to go download the EA. It's very stable. It's very good. It works. Use it against your code base for two reasons. One, to see if your code base actually works with Java 9 and to see where those things need to be migrated in your code. But two, if you find any unexpected behavior, you do want to report it back now before the Java 9 release. So it would be really cool to kind of go ahead and have a look at how it works and see if there's any unexpected behavior. There's loads of stuff like a feedback forum where you can ask for advice on, is this expected behavior? There's places to report bugs. There's a whole page about the migration, like what you might expect to see failing, what sorts of things you need to do to migrate your code, and so forth. All of these links will be available on a slide at the end of the presentation. OK, so that's fine. We can compile against Java 9. That's a good start. There are some new features in Java 9, some of which are actually really quite nice. So we have some new methods on the Streams API. Let's take a look at this. So it turns out, has anyone been bitten with infinite streams? Put your hands up if you have. Like one person, OK. I have, I guess, if you're running things like stub services and things like that, what I quite often do is I start up an infinite stream, which is going to emit a bunch of data so that I can test against that data. The problem with infinite streams is that they really are infinite, and you can't stop them. There's like no way to stop them apart from like Control-C. And I found that a bit frustrating when I first started working with Java 8. But Java 9 addresses some of these concerns. So let me show you a test. Let me show you a test to prove that my infinite, my service actually doesn't stop. It just, you can see it's spinning. It's just, there's no way to stop the service because the infinite stream just keeps going and going and going. With Java 9, let's start working with the language level Java 9. I have some new methods I can use on streams. So I can do things like take while. So I can take it until some point. So I'm going to, I guess, cheat. I'm going to take while not finished. Oh, no, I'm going to change the name of that. I don't like nots. So I'm going to take it while it's running. I'm going to create a field called running, which is true. And then at the end, when I want to stop it from outside, I'm going to set running to false. And now when I rerun my test, you should see. Why is it taking so long? There we go. It stopped straight away. So that's quite nice. There are some nice new features on the Streams API to allow you to stop streams. It's surprising that was missed, but apparently that was one of the calls that was made. So you've got things like take while, which basically keeps the stream running until a particular point. So in this case, I want to keep reading this file until I'll keep reading the file while running is true. But I can also do the opposite. I can say drop while, and so I can ignore everything up until I reach a particular point. So there are some nice things on streams to allow you to more easily manage infinite streams. Okay, what's next? Collections convenience methods. I think this might be my favorite area of code, and it's such a sort of small, quick win. So if I look at this class, so all of the code examples I'm showing you are real code examples in code that I was using before. And so when I show things working better, it's not because I came up with a fake example of something that was kind of bad before Java 9 that you never do. It's something that was kind of frustrating before in Java. So this is how we initialize a hash map. I wanted a hash map set up with a string to a particular enum. And what I have to do is I have to have a static block in order to initialize that. And if you've worked with any other JVM language, basically there's nice ways to initialize hash maps, and there isn't in the JVM until now, in Java anyway. So map of entries, and then I can say I want a map.entry of that. I'm going to go around, just change all my syntax. This is a lot more interesting when, a lot less scary when there aren't like 400 people looking at you doing this. All right, that's nice. Now I'm going to use one of my favorite features of IntelliJ IDEA, which is column select mode. Okay. And now I get to, let's turn that off. Static import this, and get rid of my dangling thingy. So now I have a much more concise way of creating my hash maps. I have a map. I can do map of entries where I can put in an infinite number of entry objects, or I can actually say map of, and this gives me, I can say key value, key value, key value, key value, up until 10 parameters. I've got more than 10, so I'm going to use map of entries. It's not quite as pretty as, like, I'm a big fan of the way that Groovy initializes hash maps, but it's a big improvement over what we had before. So I think this is one of those under-advertised things that's going to come in Java 9. In a similar area of collections, we have, let's see, I knew this wasn't going to work. Fighting with my formatter. Reformat it so everyone can see it. Okay, so I have a set which is initialized with a bunch of values. And what I have to do that is I hack around it horribly using arrays as list and put that into a hash set in order to get a set of these values. Now, this is just going to be so much easier in Java 9, where I can just say set dot of these values. And I'm just going to get a set of those values. So there's a bunch of these things around collection helpers, and it's not going to change anyone's lives the same way that lambdas and streams did, perhaps, but it is going to make our lives as developers just that tiny bit nicer and a bit less like, oh, how do I create a hash map from these things? Or how do I create a set from these things? So just going to remove tiny frustrations, I think. Okay, private methods on interfaces. Now, when I first heard that, I thought that's kind of weird because the whole point of an interface is to define an interface that other people are going to use. Why would I need a private method on an interface? And the answer is, of course, that interfaces are no longer the interfaces we used to know. So interfaces, let me show you an example. Interfaces can now have static methods or default methods. So interfaces can now have behavior in them. And now that that's the case, and again, this is like a real example that I actually had in my code. Go back. Now that that's the case, I might want to have private methods on my interfaces. So if I extract this, I'm going to call this get field value. And now I can reuse the same block of code, and I can make it private. So that's why I want private methods on interfaces, so I can share code between my static methods or my default methods. Again, just another nice little thing which is going to make things a little bit easier. Updated deprecation. I think for a lot of people, updating deprecation is not necessarily super exciting. If you've ever worked actually creating an API for anyone or a library for anyone, when I was working on the MongoDB Java driver, for example, you start to understand how difficult it is to deal with deprecation. You want to be able to say not just deprecated, but you want to be able to say when it was deprecated and how long it's going to be deprecated for, potentially. So if I look at an example, instead of just saying this is deprecated and potentially logging it somewhere in the Java doc or failing to log it in the Java doc, I can now put information about this deprecation inside the annotation. So I can say this is deprecated since. This is a string value, so it doesn't just have to be sort of a double value of 1.8 or whatever. I could say this is deprecated since forever because it was a terrible idea. And then I can say for removal. So there's kind of two ways of doing deprecation. Certainly there's kind of an unspoken standard that things, particularly in the Java libraries, are deprecated, as in don't use it. But it's still there, and it's going to be there forever. But when you're actually using other libraries, often when they say deprecated, it's like, this is deprecated, and it will go away next release, so get rid of it. So you can say for removal true. And there's another nice area around deprecation, which you may have noticed. If you're ever trying to clear all the warnings out of your system, which as an OCD person, I tend to try and get rid of all the warnings, you'll notice that generally, when you import a deprecated class, it gets flagged as you're using a deprecated class. And even if you suppress the warnings, it still warns you that you're using a deprecated class. But in Java 9, you don't get that anymore. So you can now clear all your deprecation warnings quite happily, which is quite nice. It's a tiny thing, but it just helps you get that much closer to having a clean code base with no warnings and at least a list of to-dos of the warnings you need to clear up. Okay, so I've spent enough time just talking about the exciting and or not so exciting little features in Java 9 which are going to be useful for us as developers. It's probably time to start looking at Jigsaw. Obviously, for the stuff I just talked about in terms of compiling to Java 9, in terms of using features in Java 9, IntelliJ IDEA is just going to work the same way it always did, the way that you kind of expect it to. And when the new features are available, you can use them as you expect. Jigsaw is a little bit of a different beast because Jigsaw has a bunch of files which are not really what we were expecting to see. So for this demo, well, let me show you. In IntelliJ IDEA 2016.2, which is the current release, when you have a Jigsaw project, which I'm not sure, is anyone working with Jigsaw right now? Thank goodness. There are people working with Jigsaw right now. But if you open even the simple demo, which is available on the Jigsaw website, which I've got a link to, IntelliJ IDEA will say, I don't really understand why this file is called module-info.java. That seems kind of weird. And it will say class or interface expected, because it's expecting it to be a Java class. And that's not really an irrational thing to expect. But IntelliJ IDEA 2016.3, which will be out very, very soon. I'm not sure if I can promise the date, but it'll be really soon. When you open the same project, then you don't get the errors, which might seem like a tiny thing, but it's not really a tiny thing because you don't want your projects to error. So not only does the module info file compile correctly, but you also get auto-completion the way that you'd expect from your IDE. So I can it knows that you want to type module. It knows that you're going to import modules. So it's a small thing, but now IntelliJ IDEA does support module info, and it supports basic Jigsaw functionality, if you like. Note that the module that you define in Jigsaw has to correspond to the IDEA module, otherwise it's just not going to work properly. Yes, and it is working properly because it correctly imports the class from the other module. So we have very rudimentary support available right now in IntelliJ IDEA 2016.3. I can see that you all care about that because you're all using Jigsaw right now, right? But it's there, so you can start using it. So in the current version of IntelliJ, we have syntax support for module info, the code completion, which I showed you, compilation of multi-module projects, which I guess you'd kind of expect. If you have a multi-module project, you do want it to compile. There's an open ticket for the support, for the Jigsaw support in IntelliJ. So if you do start playing with it and you find any issues or you find any ways that you would expect it to work, it would be really useful for you to kind of put it on that ticket, because it's all well and good us kind of developing features, but we really do need users to tell us how they're really using it and what's useful for them. Coming in some version of IntelliJ next year, hopefully, automatic generation of module info Java files from the IDEA module structure. So this will be useful if you do start migrating to Java 9 when Java 9 eventually comes out. At some point next year, probably, you'll be able to start generating Jigsaw type projects from your existing code. And when you import a Jigsaw project, IntelliJ IDEA will understand that and create the right modules for you. Also, we'll have support for JLink artifacts as well. Again, if you have any features that you want to see or anything that you want, any ways that you expect things to work, then do log an issue. We do actually drive the development of the IDE from the things that our users tell us. Okay, JShell, which is the REPL, which I think is one of the other big ticket items for Java 9. Has anyone seen any of the talks about the REPL? Oh, good. That means I don't have to demo it. Good. Okay, so this is kind of one of the really interesting areas, actually. For me, I think that what's interesting about the REPL is that as a long-term Java developer, I have not worked with a REPL before. I don't really know the best way to work with a REPL. The way that I kind of try things out is usually through writing unit tests or writing small pieces of functionality. So I think the REPL is really interesting because I think it's going to change the way some of us work. At the moment, in the current version of IntelliJ, we don't have some sort of native integrated support for the REPL. I've just opened it inside the terminal, so I'm basically running it from the command line inside IntelliJ. There's a couple of reasons that I would do this. One, so that everything's inside the same IDE. I could open it inside the command if I want to. Two, this is a Windows machine, and the command line's kind of rubbish on Windows, so I can actually have copy and paste from inside the IntelliJ terminal. And three, I can easily copy stuff from over here and paste it into the terminal inside here. So there's kind of some benefits to using the IntelliJ terminal rather than your operating system command line. So just for those who might not have seen any demos, the REPL allows you to do things like, there we go. I thought it wasn't working for a second. I can type in a string with 0 semicolons in the end. It will assign it to a variable. I can do things like I can create variables if I want to. So I can say int age equals 21. I can do things like I can do calculations. I can just basically do kind of experimental stuff. I can create strings. Sorry, I can create methods. So I can have like string name. Return Trisha. So I can kind of build up some stuff here. I can also, there are commands. So I can, the thing is about the REPL is it's not just simply parsing Java. It's kind of a fully featured thing in its own right. So I can do commands like I can have a look at all the variables that I've defined so far. I can do things like I can look at my history. I think history is quite useful if you wanted to sort of copy and paste some of that stuff into, say, a script or into something that you're going to turn into like a more fully featured Java thing. So I think the thing to remember about JShell from an IDE point of view is when people sort of say, well, could you not just like delegate stuff to JShell or just run this Java stuff in JShell? It's not quite as straightforward as that. It's like this fully featured ecosystem in its own right, which is really nice. And it actually offers loads of support of its own, like tab completion and things like that. So the IDE isn't needed to provide a lot of these things because it's already there, part of the REPL. There are, to kind of show a counter example, if you like, some of the things that currently exist inside the IDE for doing like scripting, if you like, or experimental stuff, is you can open Scratch files. Let's have a look. Scratch. So I can have a new Scratch file. But the problem with Scratch files, this works really well for things like scripting languages. It doesn't really work so well for Java because I still need to do, if I try and do sys out, it won't recognize that because I'm not inside a fully formed proper Java class. So I have to say, or if I do public static void main, I get myself a main method, but I have to be inside a class. So even the Scratch files for Java, because it's like this proper full massive OO language, I still have to have a class of some name, I don't know, Scratch, in order to start playing around with any of the language stuff. So that's kind of one of the limitations of Java, and that's what the REPL is supposed to solve for us. So here we can, with the REPL, we can just say, well, I don't even need to say system out. Okay, you can just say the stuff that you really care about. So hopefully in the future, in some date in the future, the Java Scratch files will start using the REPL underneath the covers, so we don't have to have like a fully formed object for that stuff. We can start scripting in Java, if you like. The other thing I wanted to show you was the Groovy console, where this is kind of built into the IDE. So if I can do things like then I can use the full features of my IDE, including auto-completion and highlighting and so forth, and run stuff in the bottom in the actual console itself. And I think this is kind of the direction we probably will go with the REPL. We'll probably support the REPL in something like this. No promises, not sure when, but it will probably be something a little bit like this. What's next? Okay, so the examples I was using from the REPL is from the REPL tutorial. And this is really cool, actually, because when I first played with the REPL, because it's kind of like a command line which just stares at you, you just put in like silly things that occur to you. With the tutorial, it actually guides you through a bunch of stuff that you wouldn't have discovered on your own. So it's a really cool resource. Again, if you have any ideas for our support for the REPL, we actually do have a ticket for what we're going to do. We haven't decided when or what or who, so any ideas that you have are gratefully received there. Right, I told you this was going to be short. I've still got 32 minutes left. Yeah, so there's the URL for all the contents of this talk. If there's anything that you want to see demoed or any questions that you have, now would be a really good time to raise your hand and let me know. Yes? Can you maybe demo some of the shortcuts I use in IntelliJ? That's like a whole talk in its own thing. Yes, I can come back to that in a minute. Anything Java? Yes?
Yesterday we saw like a REPL, you can type the command edit and it will open. So I wonder if the connection with set of and list of and these things, what implementations do you get from that?
Sorry, I was listening to one question over here first. You said, I've lost you now.
Okay. So yesterday we saw a talk where you can use the edit command from the REPL and it will open an editor.
Okay.
So I wonder if that would be a good use case for like to edit directly in IntelliJ.
Okay, so there was a talk yesterday which demoed if you use the edit command, it will open an editor. And it sounds like a good place for integration with IntelliJ IDEA. Yes, okay, that sounds very logical. What was the other question about collections?
What implementations do you get from set of and list of and these things?
I believe the defaults are like array list and hash set. I think that can be defined. I don't know. I can't see who's asking the question, but I'm aiming it in that general direction. I think it's the defaults you'd usually expect to see. They are immutable, yes. And they are immutable. Okay, everyone's already bored. Thank you very much for listening to my very short talk. If you have any more feedback or questions, please do feel free to come and ask me or ping me on Twitter. I'm happy to show you some IntelliJ shortcuts if you like, particularly if there's an area that you're particularly interested in seeing. Thank you very much.